You know, back when I was 19 years old, I was given the best piece of advice that I've ever received. I was told, Daryl, when you stop fighting, the fighting stops. Let's talk about that. Welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast. My name is Daryl Dittmer. Today I'm joined by Mary Beth O'Connor. Mary Beth describes her journey in her new memoir, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. 6 years into her recovery, Mary Beth attended Berkeley Law and was appointed a federal administrative law judge in 2014, from which she retired in 2020. Mary Beth is on the board of directors for She Recovers Foundation and for Life Ring Secular Recovery. Welcome, Mary Beth. Great to have you.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
I am too. You know, I'm continually fascinated by stories of recovery and the paths that people take and the change in paths that happen with people and some of the aspirations and you know how people get on with their lives or change their lives and it's just fascinating to me, and I'm so enamored with the title of your book is phenomenal, From Junkie to Judge, right? That's incredible. What an incredible story. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd love it if you'd share your story, what sort of brought you to where you are and to where you went from junkie to judge. I'm such a big believer that stories are what make the world go around and what help people, and it's everyone's unique. It's what we have to give. So I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you. Okay, we're back on.
The judge part of my story is unusual, but the truth is that the beginning part, unfortunately, isn't that unusual. I grew up in a household where my mother was violent, but also she just wasn't bonded or connected to me. And I mean, I was even left for 6 months at a nunnery when I was first born, and later for 3 years at a great grandmother. But also things got a lot worse when she married my stepfather when I was 9, because he was very violent with her, physically, sexually violent with me. All of these are common precursors, right, to developing an addiction. And so for me, my first drug was alcohol when I was 12. And by 17, I was shooting meth. So I progressed pretty quickly. I mean, I had abused everything that I used before that, but for whatever reason, meth just chemically fit me best. And when I found it, that was, really my hyper focus. And then I used until I was 32. I had a couple better years when I went to college, not great years, but better years. But at the end of college, I started using meth again on basically a daily basis for 10 more years. And so it was a really, long, miserable arc by the end. And then, as you say, gradually when I got sober, professionally I developed, but a big part of my recovery was not just the sobriety side, it was the PTSD trauma side, which for me showed up as really severe anxiety. And so I knew that I had to address the ramifications of the violence if I was ever going to be happy and productive. And again, that's very common that people that get sober have to deal with trauma histories or other mental health conditions. And so that's sort of the short arc of the whole thing.
Yeah, and I mean there are so many things that can contribute, and I've been asked the question many times. So, you know, where in the history was it the entire history? Was there specific instances? Were there things that just sort of triggered things that were worse than other things? What do you believe contributed most to shooting the meth and doing the things that were destructive?
I mean, For one thing, my stepfather's violence, there was there's that lack of predictability, right? Where your behavior and what happens to you have very little connection. And that creates a lot of anxiety and stress. But also because I knew before we ever entered that household that my mother was not on, not on my side, not paying attention. When the violence with him really escalated, I knew I had nowhere to turn, on top of which he was abusing her and nothing was happening. Like that wasn't being stopped either. So it's just that feeling of knowing that you're alone at a young age. You're in a situation you can't control. You're in a situation where not only did I worry about my safety, but I was the oldest. And so I felt some responsibility for protecting, my younger sister and my younger brother. So there were a lot of those different kind of pressures. And then for the escalation later, I also had some sexual assaults outside the home. One was really, long and life threatening. And I had a violent boyfriend for a while, which is also a common choice of, women who were abused in the household. So it was really that whole picture of nowhere to turn, no control, and high danger.
So in terms of recovery, in terms of starting on a path after everything that had happened to you, and some stories I hear and they just hit me, and it's difficult to comprehend, and everybody's got a different story obviously, but some things just seem so difficult. And how did you get to the point where you were ready to change, where you were ready to let go of addiction, where you were ready to move life forward?
I mean, by 32, I was feeling very, trapped, very, very debilitated, exhausted, sort of like beyond comprehension, exhausted. And I was miserable, and my partner was ready to throw me out, and I couldn't hold a job, so everything was hitting me. It was sort of that wearing down process. I just got worn down, but at the same time, I did not go into rehab thinking I'm going to get sober and life's going to be great. I went into rehab thinking, well, sober is obviously not an option, but maybe I could figure out how to use less and do better. Like that was really as far as my imagination could go. And it took me being exposed to others who had similar histories to mine, and a number of women that I met did, and yet they were succeeding. Like I needed to see that to sort of start to absorb that maybe actually true recovery, having an opportunity to live a happy and productive life, that maybe that actually would be on the table if I did the work, and so that was a process to even get to that belief system, that level of hope.
For sure. I can relate wholeheartedly to that because, there's a time in my life where I had zero confidence. I couldn't look people in the eye. I couldn't hold a conversation. I wasn't a functioning member of society. There was, excuse me, I got involved when I was in treatment. They involved me with the 12 steps and that sort of thing, which for me became a roadmap for how to live a different way. But when I first went into treatment, I was the same way. I was like, I mean, this probably isn't going to be an option for me, but I'll go through the process and I'll do the best I can. But by the time I got out, which was a 30-day program, um, there were two things that I got. I got hope, which was that I could live a different life, that I could feel good. That's all I wanted to do really, was just feel good. And for me, it was the 12 steps. It was a place to hang my hat. And I was 19 when I got sober. So I was just a kid, trying to figure it out, and not only figure out how to live sober and drug free in a world, but to be able to function and have a life, and all those sorts of things. So I can relate 100% to that part of it. And what is that element for you that made that shift? I know you mentioned other people and relating to other people. And did you find mentors? Did you observe? What were all those things that that came to light for you in that process?
Yeah, so for me, when I went to rehab, my rehab was like vehemently and adamantly 12 step only, which I didn't know when I went there and I
Mm,
wasn't expecting. And look, I absolutely support 12 step recovery when it's a good fit for people, but it was a poor, very poor fit for me. And I
mm,
told them that repeatedly and they wouldn't listen. I mean, they literally kept telling me, you're gonna fail if you don't do what we tell you. And so it turned out, I mean, that was a risk. They put me in danger by giving me that false message. I mean, I got sober in 93, 94, and 12 steps wasn't the only option. Even then, there were other options. LifeRing, I'm on the board. Their parent, SOS, was there. Smart's parent was there. Women for Sobriety, I found all those when I got home. So they put me at risk. But on the other hand, what that forced me to do was take ownership of my recovery from day one. Like I always viewed myself as the decision maker. And I always viewed it as my job to listen. Like I read all of the AA big book, I read all of the NA text. I would listen to people talking about things they were doing during the smoke break at the NA meeting. Like I was proactively open and absorbing the ideas, but I always viewed it as my job to decide which of these techniques and strategies and philosophies are a good fit for me. Which ones am I going to apply? And it turned out that taking that approach actually, in the long run, I think helped me, because it started to build my sort of confidence in my ability to guide myself forward, right? In my ability to not make perfect decisions, because none of us do that, right? But to make overall good choices and to sort of start guiding myself in the positive direction. And one of the things that they told me in rehab too was, they told us no working on your trauma or your mental health until you have like 6 months of sobriety. Well, I thought that didn't sound like a good idea. And today we know that's the wrong answer, right? Today
mm,
we know that you need to do it together. So when I got home from rehab, again, disagreeing with them, I got a therapist with trauma expertise. I mean, I looked for and found somebody, and that was a key part of my recovery, because I doubt I could have stayed sober without working on my trauma, but I certainly wouldn't have ever been able to have a happy or productive life. And that trauma recovery took a lot longer than my sobriety recovery. And I think that's common as well, because it's more complicated, and it's older. It was there first. And so it was a longer process. And it took me, I mean, even today, my sobriety, I consider myself, basically 100% recovered. I've had 31 years. The odds of me ever going out are, very minimal. But I still struggle with the anxiety a little bit, which from the PTSD. So the repair level is higher on the sobriety side than on the trauma side. Although I consider myself 95% recovered at this point, which I can think is pretty good considering my history.
I think it's wonderful, and I love to hear that, because there are, over the years that I've been sober, it's you hear different things. People say, oh, you have to do it this way, or you have to do it that way, or whatever. I don't believe that for a second. And people say, well, you never recover. I'm like, I've been doing this stuff for a long time. I'm recovered, and I'm not going back out to drink or drug or anything like that. I'm just not. Life is way too good, not to mention the fact that I don't care. I don't care about doing that stuff anymore. And I think that's we get to a point where that shows up for us, and I think at that point, for the most part, there's just no going back. And I've been told, in therapy, things that I've done, and I don't have some of the recollections that people have of some of the traumas, but I've been told, Daryl, you got some stuff in there. You got some tough stuff in there, and some tough things that you don't remember happened. And I don't know whether to believe them or not. I suppose I've thought about, oh, do I do hypnosis? Do I do some sort of digging to see what those things are? And I've done a lot of, transformation of myself, and taking out a lot of garbage, and facing a lot of things, and a lot of, uprooting of stuff. But who knows what's there, right? I guess I look at it like, and I'd love your thoughts on this, but You mentioned happiness. I look at life now as my life is a success if I wake up in the morning with a smile on my face. And I feel like that is really indicative of where I'm at in terms of my overall recovery.
Well, a couple things that makes me think of is when I was in therapy, one of the ways that my therapist knew I was minimizing the abuse was based on my behaviors and my reactions. And it sounds like your therapist is looking at your reactions to things, your emotional status, some behaviors, and saying this indicates to me there probably was some kind of a trauma in the background. And
Mm.
for me, what it was indicative of to my therapist was that I was really minimizing the impact on me. I didn't really understand it. In fact, one of the real key forward momentum points for me was after 3 years of individual therapy, she put me in a group of women with trauma histories. And that was an eye opener for me because they were connecting their current reactions and behaviors back to the trauma in ways I had not yet connected. So they were just further along in the understanding process and the healing process. And that really helped me to understand more fully, like my aggressiveness, if I got frustrated with, customer service or whatever, that partially that was a trauma response, right? I mean, I'm always waiting for the worst thing to happen. And also this, that I was so stressed from just trying to live my life that any little thing that kicked up the stress I couldn't handle, it sort of pushed me over the edge and things like that. So that's sort of what it reminds me of with your therapist, is that we don't always fully appreciate the impact of things, even if we know the fact that they happen. I have to tell you the facts, although I forget a lot of details because there's just too many events to keep track of. But I mean, I knew generally accurately what had happened, but I didn't understand the emotional impact and the behavioral impact on me. It took me a while to get that. But the other thing that you talk about is that happiness. I think when I was in early recovery, I thought of happiness like the big events, like going on vacation, or you're at a birthday party or something, you get a promotion or you get a job. But when I realized in recovery is what you're talking about. Happiness is really contentment. Happiness is really that I wake up and I am generally happy with my life. That I have structured my life in a way that I am generally happy with. Doesn't mean that things won't happen. Of course, things happen. Problems arise for us or for people that I care about. And, you have to respond. But overall, I view happiness now as really more about contentment, about enjoying my day to day life, about setting my life up in a way that meets my needs, and also that allows me to do the things that I really want to do the most. That it allows me to challenge myself in the ways I want to be challenged, and to have sort of the right amount of relationships at the right level, of intensity, and all of those kind of things together. So my definition and my understanding of happiness has changed a lot during my recovery process.
For sure. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I when I finally started to get my head out of my rear end, I was in sobriety 1920, early 20s, whatever, and I'm just like, all right, let's tackle life, man. Let's go. Let's achieve, let's make money, let's be successful, all that sort of stuff. And I did all those things, and but they didn't create contentment. They created momentary sort of, ooh, that's cool, or wow, that feels good, or oh, I can afford that now, and all those things are fine. There's nothing wrong with those things, but it all has to come from somewhere in here, right? That contentment part of it and that fulfillment part of it, which is what you're speaking to, and exactly how I frame. I don't even know if I like the term happiness because to me it's got a fleeting nature to it. It's something that isn't a thread that runs through me. It's like, oh, happy. Oh, over here, there's happy, and it just sort of pops up as you go. So I love that you frame it in the same way, because I think it's important for people to understand, and people listening who may be early in recovery or struggling with addictions or trauma or whatever it is, that contentment can be achieved. And you had spoken earlier, Mary Beth, about knowing that it's your responsibility, and and that the road that you're on is based on your choices and based on what you decide to do with your life. And I think that's so incredibly crucial to know, because that's freedom. When the choices I make allow me to have the life that I want, that's freedom, because I can choose, and life isn't chosen for me, nor am I blaming life for where I'm at. And I think those are important things to understand for people starting in recovery, or in a current state of struggle.
Well, the other thing I think about with that is that in my early recovery, even when things were great, I couldn't feel it because of my very severe anxiety. I mean, for me, my PTSD, which, first of all, I was shocked to be diagnosed with PTSD. It was correct, but I didn't know you could have PTSD if you weren't aware of it. Like, it wasn't even in my mind. But in recovery, where it really showed up for me is very, very severe anxiety. And so even when I was actually doing the right things, or having some accomplishments, or making forward steps in my life, I could never feel safe or content or happy, because I was always in my emotionally, for me, any second it was all going to blow up and I was going to lose it. Like, any second something horrible was going to happen and take it away from me. My husband used to call me the "what about tomorrow" girl, like,
Mm.
no matter what was happening today, no matter how great it was, I didn't trust it, because that's not how I grew up, and that's not how my brain was wired. And part of recovery was learning how to get past that. Like, my therapist made me sort of challenge my thinking, because it was very disproportionate. I could see this risk, but in my mind, it was massive. And I remember saying things to her like, "I'm not saying that is going to happen. I'm saying it could happen, and I need to worry about it and make plans." And but there was always, I was always I was always feeling on the edge of catastrophe, because that's how I grew up. And it took me a long time to start to back up from that. It took me a long time to understand bad things will happen in life, no matter your good choices. You can't always control outcomes, but also things will happen to people you love. Will die, or there'll be an accident, there'll be losses, there will be pain. But I had to learn that, to trust that that's true, but I will be able to handle it. It doesn't mean I might not have some times of suffering, of course I will, or some times of struggle or challenge, but I can handle it. And that's what I have to trust. I don't have to trust nothing bad's going to happen. I have to trust that I can handle it when it does. And that took a long time for me to really appreciate and to sort of learn to rely on.
Yeah, I think that's great, and that's a beautiful way to look at it. You brought to mind something for me that I haven't thought about in a long time, and it was my my look at life used to be, oh man, what's going to happen next, right? And for a long time now, it's been, I can't wait to see what happens next. Right. And there's such a huge distinction there, and I don't know where that line was crossed, but it's been a long, long time since I thought, oh man, what's going to happen next? It just, thank God it doesn't happen anymore. I'm very happy that that doesn't happen anymore. I the part of recovery that allows us to get to that place, and again, different for everybody, and I'm completely cool with how anybody recovers. I just want people to recover. I don't care how they do it, and so what were some of the things that were really helpful for you in terms of shifting from that you know oh Lord, what's going to happen tomorrow kind of thing, to waking up with a contentment?
Well, I will say that part of my because my natural inclination was negative thinking. Like, I could always, was always hyper aware of my imperfections, what I could have, should have, would have had if I wouldn't have used drugs for 20 years, and those kind of things. It was hard for me to see my progress, and so I actually had to make conscious efforts in early recovery to pause and look backward and see how far I'd come. Like, to
Mm.
notice, oh look, it's 6 months, and you actually you may not be where you would have liked to be in your fantasy world, but you actually have made real progress. And doing that repeatedly started to make me realize that my life was going forward in a positive direction, that, that I was making positive steps and that things were getting better and better and better with time. And that it took me quite a long time to fully absorb that, but seeing that progression was a reassurance that why would that stop, right? Why would that pattern not keep going? And that was important. But it was also learning how to not believe it when I had that catastrophizing, to try to learn to create emotional distance from it. That, that's just my mind going back to old thought patterns, going back to old, wiring that's not actually true anymore. It's not true anymore that that the world is likely to completely blow up in my face. I mean, it's just not true. If something goes wrong, I'll handle it. If something goes wrong, I have my husband to help me. If something goes wrong, I have my friends. I've worked hard to put some money aside for an emergency, all those kind of things. And so it's just trying to notice and actually emotionally absorb the change in my life, the change in my lifestyle, the change in my risk, and to trust myself, to learn to trust myself, because I now was a reliable decision maker and a person who wasn't creating chaos or overreacting and making situations worse, and just to sort of absorb that this was my new life, this was my new behavior, this is who I was now, and therefore my life was I could rely on the fact that my life was much more calm, and that anything that went wrong, I was going to figure out how to address it in a sort of the best way possible, and with the support of my friends and family.
That's a really cool place to be, and I'm you have an effervescence about you that's just that I love. I do. I think that's so cool. And it's life, right? It's life emanating from you, and I think that's just a beautiful thing. But as you were speaking, I was, and I haven't really thought about it this way before, but and I've done the same thing, looking back and saying my life has gotten better than I ever imagined it could be. My grubby little fingers get in there and say, "Oh, well, you're only allowed to have this or this or this, and this is as far as you could go." And but it's not true. I can keep going, and I can keep growing and changing and improving and making better choices and building. This is what came to mind when you were speaking, is building this fortress. And I don't mean closed in and whatever, but I don't have to allow all that stuff to surmount my walls and my being and flood me and take me out. It's because of the progress, but also because of the choices, and because chosen to who I've chosen to surround myself
Right.
with, and the fact that, like I've chosen to put aside some money and just making decisions, right, that help to uh, put ourselves in a position where life is pretty freaking good. Right. It gets pretty good. And the cool part that I love about it is I'm almost 60 years old, and it keeps getting better. And that's a really cool place to be. And the reason I say that is because I want people who listen, who may be struggling or wondering what's going on, that just stick around and keep doing the best you can, and try to move yourself in the best direction that you know how. And these things will happen. I truly believe that. I believe as long as we're trying, great things are going to happen for our lives.
Well, and I think part of it too is patience. I mean, for example, when I got sober, I made a list of things to work on, and it was a pretty long list. And so, I had to like prioritize. But I will say it wasn't even the whole list. Like as I got further along, I started to see other things. Like my behaviors could do work. I could be really aggressive and reactive, especially if I felt not listened to, or if there was something important I needed you to do and you were fighting me on it. And my behavior could be bad. I mean, I was treating people in ways I didn't like. And so, like, when I started to address that, um, it wasn't like I could just magically flip a switch and behave right, right? I mean, what would happen is, like, let's say with that aggressiveness, if the situation was more neutral, then I could be better behaved. But still, if it was higher stress, I would react. And over time, I was able to handle increasingly emotional triggers. You know, the higher level of trigger, and I was able to handle it better. But it took a while to get there. It wasn't like it was overnight. In fact, I remember getting frustrated sometimes, like if I was, say, halfway through a process and people were still like reacting, like upset with me. And I'm thinking, but I'm so much better. Like, you don't know how much better I am. But it's partly um, being realistic about sort of the pace of change, right? That these things, a lot of our behaviors are old. A lot of them we learned at home. A lot of them take a long time to change. And so it's really about sort of being realistic about that it's going to be an incremental improvement process, and I'm not going to be able to sort of magically make these things change. And that was important to me in a lot of ways. That the idea of step by step incremental improvement was really key, even in my early recovery. Because when I got 30, I got sober at 32. I have a Berkeley degree, good grades, and an embarrassing resume, right? So I mean, so like in professionally and in all areas, I want to like make up for lost time. I want to rush ahead and let's fix this now. And in a year, it should be like, I never used drugs, but that wasn't going to happen. And I had to sort of, I had to force my expectations down to reality and do a sort of a more accurate analysis about where I was and where I could, what realistically was my first right step, in the direction I wanted to go, because I couldn't skip steps 1 to 4 and land on step 5. And I didn't like it because I wanted to move faster than I could, but I did learn to accept it and sort of apply it to everything, that almost all change is going to be incremental. And I just have to focus on the long-term upward trajectory and not my aggravation that I wasn't moving forward faster.
I understand that wholeheartedly, Mary Beth. I think there's something about the personality of people in addiction and recovery or whatever that we have an ability or a desire or whatever it is to just go and be sometimes extreme about things. And right. And I know I have that personality, and I've had to temper myself. I don't know how many times over the years to just, you know what, Daryl, you don't have to do 16 hours a day on something. You can do like 3, 4. You're not going to get to results faster that way because you're going to wear yourself out. You're going to burn out. You're going to slide backwards if you go too crazy at something. And that's been a constant balancing act for me for a long time. And it's certainly gotten better. I'm much more able to chill, but I do some things that help me to do that. I do breath work and I do meditation and those kinds of things because I consciously need to calm myself, and I do it on a daily basis. So I start my day with some quiet, and then it reverberates throughout the day, in terms of how that affects me or how life doesn't run over me generally. And I don't run over myself, because I think that's the greatest fight we have is me against me, right? And that's I think ultimately what we have to overcome. I've spent a long time fighting the world, fighting other people, fighting this, fighting that, and I finally figured out, well, oh, the fight's with me, and sometimes that takes a while to truly integrate, right? I'm assuming you've probably discovered that same thing.
Yeah, and definitely overwork has been one of my later recovery struggles. I mean, it's funny because some of the things that are helpful to us in early recovery, and then they actually we realize they're not where we want them to be in the long run. And so sort of that hyper drive, that I have, that hyper focus, well, that was helpful in a lot of ways. But at the same time, it does also create for me a tendency to be hypercritical of myself if I don't think I'm, making enough progress or that I'm not doing as many things. I'm retired. Okay. I'm on the board for Life Ring. I'm on the board for She Recovers. My book is out. I write pieces like for the Wall Street Journal and others. I do a lot of like workshops and train. And this is supposed to be my part-time life, but I do still struggle with keeping it part-time. Like my husband says I need to look retirement up in the dictionary because I don't know what it means. But don't get me wrong, like you, I'm much, much better, but I don't want to create this angelic perception that everything is 100% resolved. I still do have some weak points or some areas where I could improve. And one of those is this perfectionism or overwork, hyper productive need that I have. It's one of the last vestiges of my anxiety and my trauma, really. I mean, perfectionism and overwork are often trauma responses. But it's also that I got a lot of, positive feedback from that behavior, right? I mean, I got to go not to just any law school, Berkeley Law. I worked at a big law firm. I mean, all those sort of rewards that you get that reinforce some of the behaviors that in the long run really aren't in your best interest. And you have to sort of address them at some point.
Right, right. No, I agree with that. I think that's 100% true. And for me as well, that drive and that wanting to move forward helped me immensely in moving forward. But on the other hand, I also fried myself a few times. I beat the crud out of my body because I didn't know when to stop. Playing basketball with a broken foot for 30
Oh,
days before I went to just silly things like that. And I did a lot of those things to my body. So I'm recovering from that now to the extent that I can. And but I think it's important, and there's always a balance to be achieved. And I've found that normally for me, the right answer is somewhere down the middle. It's somewhere on either a little bit left or a little bit right of the middle. If I'm on one side or the other, I'm probably off the road. I'm probably in the weeds, and in some sort of trouble. When I was younger, I grew up in rural Michigan, and we used to have ditches on the side of the road, like big deep ditches. And our mantra was just keep it between the ditches. As long as you keep it between the ditches, you're going to be okay. And that's what we tried to do. And I think that applies now, although I'm certainly closer to the center than I used to be. But I haven't been off in the ditch in a little bit, but some of the things that I did to myself still reverberate today in terms of how I move forward and how I respond to things. And there's still stuff that can show up. And I think it's important, as you mentioned too, to be patient and to understand that I'm going to be working on myself until it's time for me to leave this rock.
mhm.
And so there's no big what's the hurry? I've done a lot since I've been sober and in recovery, and like you too, I wrote the books, and people would say to me, see me doing a podcast. They're like, what are you talking about? Daryl doing a podcast? Daryl would never do a podcast. What's happening here? But but you just start things, right? And you go and you move in that direction. And I think it's a very cool thing. I think it's a beautiful thing to do new things, to do different things, to be in a position where we can do new and different things, and life can completely change from what we used to be. I think that's the dream of life, but that's also the dream of recovery and sobriety and healing and just being in a better place with ourselves.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, the other side of that for me is that once I'm retired as a judge, I can talk in a much more open way now than I could before about my history, right?
Mm.
And I try to use that, I try to use that as a tool. Like that judge title, I usually use it as sort of an ear opener tool. Like when I do trainings, that maybe you'll pay a little more attention to me and listen to the information I have to share that I think is important. And so it is sort of a new time, a new role. And I did think when I was looking at retirement, I thought, what do I actually enjoy doing? Because I thought I was focused on the recovery space. I wanted to get more active and a bigger role in it. But I also thought about, what do I enjoy doing for my work life? Well, I enjoy writing. I enjoy reading and analyzing. I enjoy talking and educating and interacting. And so I try to create a role that mostly involves those things. Does it also involve answering a bunch of emails and tracking my spreadsheet? And, yeah, sure it does. But the majority of what I do are the things that I actually enjoy doing. And so that's a great place to be, to actually be able to, make choices about my role that are focused on the things I enjoy doing most. So it's the complaining is more on the, I have to watch myself on the volume side, but I did do a good job of creating a role that's mostly both rewarding and engaging for me, which is a great combination.
Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. I had never really thought of myself as, an author or podcaster or any of those things. But I love it. I absolutely love, like, when I dive into our conversation and I pull out little snippets, and I'm like, oh, that was such a great point by Mary Beth, and sharing that with people, and getting that out into the world, because I look at my role in this world now as, I don't need to do, I take care of myself so that I can take care of others. I don't take care of myself necessarily as much for me anymore, but so that I could be good for other people. And I feel like that's my role now, is to help and to give back, and to the people that help me. There were so many people that helped me, and my mentors and friends, and people that came into my life for 5 minutes or for 40 years, and they gave me something. And I want to be able to give back to other people. It sounds like you're the same way.
Yeah, and it also makes me think of that, life is in phases, right? I mean, we can't all be all things to everybody at all times. There's just certain periods where this is where I can focus, and now I can do this, and now that's taken care of, so I can focus over here. And so life is sort of like a wave um of areas that are opening up to you, or that you've sort of closed, and then you got to sort of ride those waves. And I'm saying that thinking of somebody who's newer in recovery, that what the kind of accomplishments and getting to where we are that we've talked about, that's a series of progressive different steps and different phases of our life. And that's the good news, is that life can continue to be engaging and exciting, throughout, as you said, ongoing. But you usually can't do all these things at once. I certainly couldn't have. I had to look at what at this point in my life was the right place to put my focus and my energies. And this is a new opportunity for me that I'm trying to take advantage of. And as you say, primarily to be of service, to be of, use to educate, hopefully reduce stigma, be a source of encouragement to others, all those things.
Absolutely. So let's talk about a little bit about your book, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little about your book. I can't wait to read it. I haven't yet, but I certainly will. If you could share that with us, it would be wonderful.
Yeah, so the title is From Junkie to Judge: One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. And, those words were chosen carefully. And I really thought hard about the structure, because I didn't want to write a book that was out there 22 times. But for mine, I thought it was important to show where was the reason, what were the reasons why using drugs at that excessive level, starting at that young age, why that happened, why that made sense. So I go into my pre-drug childhood to show what primed me for it. And then I have, a lot of the sort of chaos and misery of addiction. But the last 30% of my book is my first 3 years of recovery. Because I wanted it to be useful. And so a lot of memoirs at the end, it's sort of like, I went to a couple meetings and everything was great. And it's like, well, that's not helpful, So the last 30% is my first 3 years of recovery, being very detailed and specific about how I thought about recovery, how I built an individual plan that worked for me, dealing with the trauma, mental health side, as well as the substance side, to sort of show a more detailed example of what recovery might look like, or different sort of themes and things to think about. And so I thought, so that was sort of the structure of the whole thing. And I wanted to, at the end, there's like guidelines and checklists that people can go through if they're thinking about how to build a plan, or even for friends and family, it can be useful. So it's on, Amazon and all the usual sites, and bookstores have it or can get it. But I wanted it to be not just sort of a crazy drug story book, but actually to serve a purpose and to provide some useful guidance.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. I think that's so crucial, especially, the first few years of recovery, when we're getting our legs under us and getting a feel for what this whole life thing is about without being anesthetized, is daunting. And to be able to offer something that says, hey, it can be tough, and expect it to be tough, but you'll get through it. And here's how I got through it. And I think there's nothing more important than those stories and those examples, because I for me, for sure, that's what I relied upon. I relied upon when I saw people that were like, oh, wow, they have something that I want. Were they like me at one point? And, I listened to their story. I'm like, yeah, they were like me. No, they're not. And so, it's kind of a cool thing to know that there's something out there to aspire to and to reach towards. So thank you for sharing that. In terms of where we find you otherwise, Mary Beth?
So my website is junkietojudge.com, and my opinion pieces are there, which I've had pieces in like the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times and Recovery Today and others. And also, people can message me through my website if they have questions or opportunities for me to speak. I answer all messages. And then I'm on X, as you know, X/Twitter. I'm at Mary Beth O _. And I just joined Blue Sky, and there I got on early enough that I'm actually Mary Beth O'Connor. So, and I will say, I use my social media feeds. I do not spend my time arguing with people, but what I try to do is to post the new studies that come out, articles about substance use and recovery, my recovery thoughts. I keep my feed very narrow to the topics that I'm advocating for and working on, and to try to make it be useful. So if you're interested in those topics, do feel free to follow me.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you. I look at your feed and I see what you share, and it's very cool stuff. It's stuff that I think can be very useful to people, in terms of just experiencing recovery or healing from trauma or whatever that may be. So, well, Mary Beth, thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy. I will put all your information and links and all those things in the show notes, so everybody can find them and find you. And it's been a wonderful experience. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you. It's been a heartwarming discussion for me as well. I appreciate it.
If you've enjoyed When I Stopped Fighting the podcast, please check out my books and my journals on my website, DarylDittmer.com. Enjoy a 15% discount by using the code PODCAST, DARYLDITTMER.com. Thanks again.